Brian, thank you very much for joining. How are you going?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thanks. I really appreciate you joining in to talk about all things mindfulness and how it can improve dating for gay men. It can help for anyone, really. But I think that it's particularly useful in an age where we tend to personalize things and think that there are no good men out there. So, can you
Mm.
tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Brian Falduto, the gay life coach. I'm a mindfulness coach. I work primarily with the LGBTQ community, and yeah, I'm excited to talk about mindfulness and dating.
Mm. No, I am too. I guess for people who are unsure as to what mindfulness is, because it can be a bit of a buzzword, which people
Yeah,
might think, oh, is this even a thing? Can you tell us a bit about what mindfulness is?
yeah. No, I've noticed now that I'm a mindfulness coach, the amount of times that I use the word, I'm like, does that word even have any meaning anymore when I say it? But it
Yeah.
does. I think it's so important. And I think there's a lot of ways to describe mindfulness, but the way I always kind of just put it into simple terms is it's being able to hold something in your hand and look at it rather than identifying with the thing, um,
Mm.
creating some perspective around it. Um, and whether that's a thought, whether that's a challenge, whether that's a guy you're dating, just basically, uh, yeah, basic whatever practice you're doing to create some separation there and be able to be a witness to what's going on rather than be the thing that's going on, you know?
Yeah, I love that. In fact, I love the way you describe the analogy of holding something rather than identifying with it. Can you give an example of what that might look like for an individual?
Yeah. So like our thoughts, right? We meditation is a great example of a mindfulness practice because you can have a thought that's like, I haven't done enough today. And is that true? Like we don't know, but if you're if you're not looking at that thought with any perspective or any mindfulness, that thought is just going to run through your mind and you're going to believe it. And so you're going to identify with it, and soon enough you're going to go to bed thinking you didn't do enough today, and then the next day you're going to wake up thinking like yesterday was a waste, and before you know it, like the thoughts that are running through your mind kind of take over. Whereas if you were to
Mm.
like put that thought down on paper or hold it in your hand or meditate and look at the thought and dismiss it and return to the present moment, there's a lot of different ways you can get mindful about things. Um, then you're no longer identifying with it, you know, necessarily.
Yeah, I agree with exactly what you're saying. And it's funny you should mention that too, because I find in my lived experience, it's been very easy for me to personalize my thoughts and think, some things about them. Like, for example, the work example, I know that anytime I've taken a break from work, I feel guilty. And then I have to question myself and go, but why am I feeling guilty for taking a break from work? I don't need to be overly productive on a Saturday or a Sunday. I don't
Mm,
need to beat myself up if I need to take a health day for myself too. And then I think working back from there, I realized that a lot of these thoughts, which are very dysfunctional, stem from childhood upbringing. In my case, if I didn't do work, I was not seen as a good son, I was not seen as a good individual. So I had to really question that and go, but is that true?
mm.
Is my work a definition of my self-worth? And in my case, it certainly isn't. So I think that's definitely been a minor example of how mindfulness has impacted me. I'd love to hear how it's helped you in your journey.
Well, even on what you just said, I was thinking, you mentioned, do I need to be that productive on a Saturday or Sunday? I think an additional mindfulness question to ask to that would be, what is productivity, and how do I
Mm,
identify, productivity? Is it something I've learned? What do I need to do in order to be productive? And I think if we put all these thoughts down on paper, then we're no longer just being productive to be productive, right? I think productivity is a subjective term based on your day, right? So like, yeah, there's just I think it's such a cool practice because it really does open up the mind to wherever you want to be essentially. And I think that you asked why how mindfulness has helped me. I think that it's opened a lot of doors to like alleviate suffering. I used to really identify with my thoughts, and I used to be really trapped with this idea that, I was my limited beliefs. Um
mm,
And I'm still a human, and I still have those thoughts in my head, but I feel much more control and power over them, rather than them having power and control over me. And I have things that I can do, or I can free myself from something and enter the present moment. And yeah, that's kind of how mindfulness has helped me. And you can apply that to any area, whether it's dating, like we're going to talk about, or whether it's, I'm a life coach and, there's imposter syndrome all the time, or whether it's being a songwriter, uh, all the different like aspects of what I do, mindfulness can be really helpful to create freedom there.
I agree with everything you've said. And I love that you refer to how it's like that freedom from suffering,
Yeah.
because it really is. It's that liberation to actually control your mind and the reality that you have around it.
Hmm.
And I think, to give an example of it, I remember at the beginning of 2020, we had these rampant bushfires here
Oh yeah.
in Australia. It seems like such a lifetime ago because of the events of COVID and everything else that's happened. But that was the beginning of our year. We had a really bad bushfire season. And I
Hmm.
remember thinking to myself during that time, because there was a lot of other things going on in my life. I was not enjoying my work. I was not in a great financial situation. I was not getting along well with my family. And then going to work every day for an hour commute where there was just smoke pouring through the train windows as I was moving from the city to my work.
Oof.
It was not a pleasant way to be.
Scary.
And yeah, it is. And we didn't know what the harmful consequences were of that bushfire smoke. All we knew was that these were the worst fires that we'd ever, seen. So I remember thinking to myself thoughts like, it's the government's fault, why aren't they doing enough to help us? And, my life sucks. And these were understandable thoughts. I'm not in any way going to diminish what I was thinking, because that was exactly the place I was in at the time too. And I was really upset with where my life was at. But then I remember it was my PT who actually came with this really good thought. He said to me, you're not in control of any of those things. You choose how you take control of yourself. So I remember when similar circumstances hit with COVID, I felt a lot stronger, because I was like, okay, well, I can't control the virus. I can't control the government's action to put us into lockdown. What I can control is what I do for myself in that moment. And I remember feeling such a sense of peace and freedom despite the stress and pandemonium that was going
Hmm.
on. And I think that's where mindfulness really clicked for me. And I'm like, wow, like I can be in a stressful world, but not feel stressed, because I identify with how I'm feeling in the moment. And I'd be curious if that's something that you were experiencing for yourself with, COVID this year as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people that I work with, I love going back to that question, what can you control? And usually one of the only things you can control is your thoughts.
Mm.
And so that's, I think, why mindfulness is so beautiful. Um, but yeah, that does sound like a really scary time that you had. I can't imagine the smoke coming in the train and just being like, you said I don't know what that is, but I'm sure your brain was like, that's not very good.
Yeah, it was definitely putting the flight and fight in me throughout
Yeah.
that entire period. And it's different from COVID in the sense that I feel like, it's one of those things where the best we could do is wear masks like we are now. It's just the challenge in that situation was that it was such a visceral experience because you're inhaling the smoke, whereas with COVID,
Mm,
it's invisible. It could be anywhere, but the best
right.
you can do is just sanitize yourself and be mindful of people who are coughing and sneezing and how you cough and sneeze too. So I think what I learned from that experience was, what can I do to make myself feel safe?
Yeah. Yeah. And like what can I control? I think the mind does what your mind was doing. The mind was built during caveman time, so
Mm.
it has a natural fight or flight response to things. And though this year was understandably scary, there was bushfires, as you mentioned, there was a pandemic. Those are like pretty serious stressors, but oftentimes our brain is reacting the exact same way to like whether or not we should go to our friend's wedding, or like where our mind is coming up with all these like panic narratives. Um, and I don't know why that example came to my head, but or just like, like whether I'm gonna pay rent or not, like that kind of stuff, right?
Mm,
Our mind is sending these, and in order for us to like come up with an understanding of this scary thing that's going on, that's where all these narratives come in. Like, you're not doing enough. If you're not making rent, that means you're not doing enough. You need to do better. This is a panic moment. This is a fight or flight moment. And then, which isn't true. I mean, we were to look at all those statements individually, they're not necessarily true to what you're doing or what you've got going on. And I think that's why mindfulness provides that freedom that we're talking about.
yeah, I completely agree. In your experience, Brian, where do you think a lot of those thoughts come from? Because in my case, I know it's mostly from my parents,
Yeah.
and I've had to cross-examine mine. In your experience as a life coach, focusing and practicing on mindfulness, where do you think a lot of those dysfunctional thoughts stem from?
I think a lot of places, our parents, society, ourselves, and just like things we picked up over the years, school, bullying, all the things. But I think
Mm,
another place that they come from is feelings. And I think that sometimes we experience a feeling, and the feeling is actually really true. But in order for our brain to process the feeling, it's coming up with all these thoughts that's like, that are these panic narratives so that we can either like avoid the feeling or protect ourselves from the feeling. Whereas if you were to actually just deal with the feeling and not surround it by thoughts, you would you would probably be a little better off than believing all these thoughts that are running through your head. So I think that it is a lot of like circumstantial things, but I think also times we're just afraid to be with our feelings and like the what's running through our body. You know what I mean?
I do, I do. I completely agree with you. And I think that in many cases, there's a real disconnect between our brain and our central nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So we tend to think that what's going on up here is an expression of reality. So to give a clear example of that, I think that for many of us, we can look at the way the world is and think, so for example, if you've grown up in a family where you have experienced a divorce, you are a child, and you don't like that feeling. It's not a good feeling. Yet you could internalize that divorce and think to yourself, this is a terrible thing, and I don't want to let other people down in the same way that my parents let me down.
Mm-hmm.
And though you may never actually articulate it in those words, that can be the thought process that's going on up here.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, it can then trickle over into areas like dating, where you feel the need to control your
Mm-hmm.
partners because you're so shit scared that they're going to break up with you, they're going to not be a good fit for you, whatever reason it may be, because you don't want to go through and repeat that same experience again. And then the
Mm-hmm.
question you have to really ask yourself is two things, which is, to what extent is your parents' marriage a reflection of you and your responsibility? And two, is having that thought ultimately productive for maintaining healthy relationships? And whether or not I believe it's right or wrong, the fact of the matter is that either that individual will say, yes, that is exactly what I believe, and they'll continue to do what they've done for many, many, you know, times over and over again to control, or they'll take on a new thought and a new action will emerge, hopefully a better one.
Mm. Yeah. No, I mean, and what you said about dating really resonated with me because the dating world is actually the reason that I actually put this together. I said yes to do this and then I didn't even actually put these two things together. But the dating world is like the reason I got into mindfulness because I did a lot of what a lot of gay guys do when they come out of the closet, where you spend your whole life kind of disconnected from yourself and witnessing these narratives from your parents that you talked about and not wanting to deal with those feelings. So you come up with all these like thoughts in your head to kind of just make sense of everything. Um,
Mm.
but then you come out of the closet and suddenly all those thoughts you've thought about yourself or about things are kind of turned on their head, right? So you enter this whole new period of like rapidly trying to figure yourself out. And often that involves looking for validation from other people. And I was very much someone who did that when I came out of the closet. And I entered a lot of really toxic and like difficult dating situations that led me to rock bottom quite a few times. And that's kind of why I was like, how does one not fall prey to this kind of thing? How does one actually be happy with themselves with or without the approval of someone else? And then that's when I kind of discovered the work of mindfulness. And, you know, it's not easy work, but I never feel quite as much of a victim of dating as I used to. I feel more like I have autonomy over my role in dating scenarios.
I loved everything that you just said there, that you have autonomy. And the word I was going to say is actually choice and control,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, and you're no longer a victim of those dating circumstances. And it's so funny when you were like, oh, thinking about this conversation, this is what led you into mindfulness practice. Same here. It's amazing how I think intense suffering can make you realize I don't want to suffer anymore.
yeah.
I don't want to be in pain anymore. I actually want to circle back to something that one of our viewers asked, which is, can you explain what your last partners did wrong in the relationship? I'm happy to talk about my experience with that and relate it to mindfulness going forward. Is that something you'd be comfortable doing too, Brian?
Yeah.
I think I could probably start this one off by saying, similar to you, Brian, without knowing your circumstances of how you got to where you are, I know for me it was a situation where I was dating a guy who I acted and made me feel like they wanted to go into a relationship. And though we were only together for a month, it was a very hot and heavy month where, you know, we slept on the first date, you know, there were a lot of juicy similarities between us. The connection and the chemistry was amazing. And I'd ignored all of this guy's red flags. I had not measured any compatibility between us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the thing that really hurt the most in my mind, and this is linking it to mindfulness, is that I thought I was a failure for this guy not wanting to be with me. And I was going back in my head trying to think, what have I done wrong? Because I was thinking, you know, well, if I'd done something wrong, maybe I could fix it. Maybe I could get back together with him. And then it took me 6 months of wallowing in pain before I read a book called A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, who's
Mm-hmm.
pretty much who really unlocked mindfulness for me to make me realize, but that's a thought that I have in my head, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked back at the evidence, I thought to myself, well, hang on a minute. If I know that if I'm consistently doing all these actions, which I did in that relationship with all my friends, then if my friends have never acted in the way that my partner did, does that make me a failure or a bad person? Does it maybe mean that this guy just wasn't compatible or a good fit for me? And I then was able to release myself, you know, the burden of thinking that I was somehow at fault for that not going the way it should have. And that's when my pain was essentially released and I felt much better. So I think for me, that was a very formative experience for mindfulness. I'd love to hear your experience with this too.
Yeah, so funny. Eckhart Tolle was one of my introductions to this world as well. You know, I definitely am not, I'm definitely comfortable sharing about the guys that I felt were really rocky relationships. But something I want to say maybe before I even try and attempt to summarize those relationships is that I'm also like 50% at fault in all of those scenarios. And I think what happens
Mm.
without mindfulness is that you really do identify with that victim mindset and like, how could he treat me this way? And I can't believe that this happens to someone like me. I must not be doing a good job in this relationship, or like I can't, you know, all these things, right? And I think that yeah, it's you know, Alan Downs writes about it in The Velvet Rage. It's very much like stage two, where you have no method of validating yourself because of how you were raised. And so um
Mm.
and and so you're just completely victim to every like decision this other person makes, and it's really your whole world if that person decides to walk away or not answer a text even. Honestly, it's just everything gets magnified because you're identifying with this situation, this person, these thoughts in your head. um to attempt to summarize these two guys, I mean, I've had a couple of guys, but two really stand out to me. One was in college. We came out together, and then he was just very also disassociated from himself. And so he didn't know what he wanted either. And it was a really hard place for me to just put like everything I had bottled up for 15 years, you know, like into this guy's lap, because he had no idea who he was either. And just a lot of choices that left me feeling completely in the dust in that situation. And then once we were finally kind of on a rhythm, we were very competitive with each other. We were very, because now he was my only validator. So I needed him to think I was good. I needed to be better than him, you know, all these different things, right?
Mm.
Um, and then the second situation was this guy was in a relationship, but he was like, I'm in love with you, but he would never actually do anything about it. And then that, I mean, that's like, and that's just clearly a situation where like I am not operating from a place of knowing my worth, right? Because if I know my worth, I wouldn't be waiting around for some guy to like leave a situation that he's obviously not planning on leaving anytime soon. He's just stringing me along, right? But I had no sense of self-worth, and I was just walking past all the red flags, as you put it. Um, because, you know, and even that thrill of like maybe this will work out, you know, think of how many years we spent in a fight or flight mindset. We're used to that. We don't want to just be sitting around content with ourselves, right? That's not something we've ever been associated with. So even when we're out for the first couple of years, we're still in that like space, you know?
Mm.
I've never
Yeah.
done, I've only done one of these like a few times before, and this is literally the most distracting thing. I want to read everyone's things and like say hi to everyone who joins.
Well, I don't know if you can see it on your side because on your screen, you're the bottom half of what I'm seeing. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
seeing words pop up on half of your face at the moment
Yeah,
too.
I know. I
Which,
love it. I think they look nice on me.
well, it's good when you've got words like honest and true validation because then at least it makes you feel like that's good words, which is a good way to go too. Hey, Christina, and hello
What if
everyone
someone's
who's
like,
joining.
what if someone's like, this is bullshit, turn it off?
Well, it's on your face, not mine, so that works for you. But going to something that you said too, I think, Brian, one thing that I love about what you were saying is the fact that when you're in that stage where you are sailing past these red flags because you're trying to, you're going for the thrill, you're excited by what the potential is. And that's the problem. We're
Mm-hmm.
raised, and this is now linking to The Velvet Rage. So for anyone who hasn't read that book, The Velvet Rage is a fantastic book on the stages that gay men go through in our upbringing and development. So really, really, really good read. What I would interpret from what you're saying, Brian, is, when you're in that situation where you're a guy who's gay and you have grown up as a type A individual, you're a hard worker, you always overachieve because why do we do that? Because we don't often receive unconditional love from our parents. So what do? We overcompensate in so many different areas to try and feel validated. And so the same is true of love. We go in 150% because the minute we taste something that we've never had before, which is the love of a male partner, particularly if our parents, especially a dad, has never given us that unconditional love before, then it's kind of like our first shot of heroin. We're just hooked immediately. And it's not a
Mm-hmm.
healthy experience because we're supposed to feel unconditional love at a certain level. But if you give it to someone at such a high level, then they're going to think this is their everything. So I think when we get that fight or flight response, our automatic thought is, I don't want to lose this person, which is actually the reverse of what the thought should be, which is, this person's terrifying me. Why are they scaring me? Why is my gut screaming butterflies? And for those that haven't watched any of my previous content, the butterflies is actually not a sign of romantic love and interest. It's actually panic. And it's kind of like stage fright. It's like what you would get when you're going into a situation where you're about to join, like say, paragliding, you're about to go bungee jumping. It's that excitement and terror factor. Too much of that for a long period of time is actually an indicator that you're in a state which is causing you to feel frightened and threatened. So I think that for many of us growing up as gay men, we ignore our bodily cues because we're too busy thinking that we have to win this guy over.
Absolutely. I agree so much with everything you just said. It was really well put.
Now, thank you very much. I feel like after my own internal work of this has been like sort of the internal like TED talk in me is just coming out with all this stuff too. Has that been similar in your experience, Brian, too? Like when you've been sort of looking back and retrospectively reflecting on all your experiences, would you say that's fairly similar for what you've gone through as well?
Yeah, something Mark Manson said once is that he wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Um, and I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on here, but
I'll go for it.
something he said was that we're always craving like once in a lifetime experiences, right? But people who are having once in a lifetime experiences all the time are craving mundane experiences. So it's like life is about a balance, and I do think, you know, if you're constantly looking for that like on edge feeling, then yeah, that can definitely be a warning sign.
I think so. I think so. And I think the problem with these once in a lifetime experiences is that they're so limiting because, you know, you think about it, once in a lifetime, that means that, you know, you'll never experience this again. So if you
Yeah,
choose to run that thought, you by definition don't want to experience another amazing moment again, surely.
yeah. And what I want to say to people is because like if you are like living in that on the edge space and you're going to the clubs, which is fine, and you're like, you know, doing the thing where you're dating around and you're having fun and you just want to like you want to be in the experience and be excited and be proud, like that's all okay. But I feel like what we're talking about, you know, this I even use the word mundane. It might sound even boring to someone who's living that lifestyle, but I don't know, I almost want to like stress that um the simplicity that comes with just living authentically, if you're even able to able to achieve a genuine authentic moment a day, it's really just it's so refreshing in its own way, and it is kind of its own little once in a lifetime experience because it's not it's it's I don't know, it's not outside of yourself, and so it feels true and it feels exciting, and um yeah, I don't know. So like I want to there's a reason that people should do mindfulness work and kind of rest in that mundane simplicity, even if that's where it brings you, you know, because I think out of that moment comes like what you actually want and what you actually care about, rather than identifying with all these things around you and thinking that that's what you want or care about, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean?
It does. And I think to complement what you're saying there, Brian, I think that comes from external validation because I think
Yeah.
for so many of us, we're trained to think, well, if I'm not doing all these things with other people, if I'm not seen at the clubs, if I'm not doing all these things like with a partner, looking good, looking fit, looking ripped, you know, therefore there's something wrong with me. Couldn't be further from the truth. The sitting with the mundane element, as you put it, I think I can express that by saying that my life right now might seem a little bit boring to most people, but I actually love it. Like the thought
Yeah.
of going out clubbing actually kind of just exhausts me.
Hmm.
Not because I'm an old person. I'm not. It's not that. It's more of just how does it make me feel? And so I focus now more on terms of, okay, would I prefer to work on my business or go out with friends to this club? And the bottom line will ultimately be in that moment, how do I feel about what each of those actions will bring me? I wouldn't tell you right now, oh, I'm just going to stay home and do work, or I'm going to go
Hmm.
out and be with my friends. It would really boil down to, how do I feel about this? Because if I'm
Hmm.
exhausted, I'm going to sit with that exhaustion and just go, I'm going to lean into it and just enjoy that, you know, looking after myself.
Yeah.
And I think that's really helped me because I think part of my journey has been learning how to just assert boundaries for myself by saying no to people more and actually being okay to choose when I want to do things. Like if friends say to me like, oh, I want to go out to this musical or I want to do this, I'm like, great, you do you. Like, I don't want to do that even for the
Hmm.
sake of our friendship. And that's okay. I
Yeah.
think I think the thing that people need to realize is that I think sometimes we're with the wrong people. I
Yeah.
think sometimes we also have to realize that if we're doing things for the sake of other people without treating ourselves first, that's what leads into us perpetuating these cycles of working for the wrong individuals, being with the wrong partners, and trying to ultimately arrive at a better outcome. Like, you know, I think so many of us think, oh, well, if I do all this work for this individual, they'll finally see my worth and you know, who I am and how I'm showing up. Probably similar to what you were describing with, you know, the guys that you've been dating as well. Like they'd recognize your worth, but the reality is that if they're not seeing it now, they're never going to see it later. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. I think one of the cool things that came out of this past year is a lot of people were forced to enter this stripped space where they had to be with themselves and they had to kind of just sit with their thoughts or sit with their feelings. And I think anyone who didn't resist that probably learned a little bit about themselves. And I've heard from a lot of people that during this time, they became really aware of what they missed or didn't miss about their previous, you know, existence here, or like what they want or what they don't want. And I think a little bit of clarity comes in that time, which is what you're saying, which is like, yeah, I'm not going to do something I don't want to do. I'm going to do something that I do want to do. It all just becomes a little bit more clear rather than just chasing highs. Because I think when we're chasing all those highs, that's when we get like an equal amount of lows, you know, because it's just about give and take, right? So I think that if we're constantly wanting to be up here, then we're just asking for a lot of moments down here as well. Whereas, you know,
I think you're right. I think you're right. Because I think that, you know, this is something that may shock a lot of people, but ultimately the art of hanging out with people is a form of addiction because it's that whole idea of constantly needing to be with people in order to feel good. You know, being
mm,
with people is a form of escapism. And sometimes we choose to be with the wrong people. And sometimes people will say, well, that's just my lifestyle. It's like, no, you chose that lifestyle.
mm,
You actively created this because that is part of your identity. Circling back to dating, I saw one of our viewers, they made a really good question, which is, have you guys ever experienced being ghosted and how did you feel about it and how did you deal with it? I'd love to
yeah,
hear your thoughts and feelings on this, Brian.
yeah, I saw that and I wanted to answer because I was ghosted on Thursday.
I was ghosted on Saturday.
Woo! Yeah. Hey.
I love how we're
Um,
both just like so not like bothered by that at
no,
all.
I wasn't bothered about it at all, and here's why. And guys, this is a lot of hard work that I'm even able to say this, but had nothing to do with me. It had to do with his experience of the world that day and what he wants out of things and his view of the app and what he's using it for. And, you know, it had literally zero to do with my worth, my day. And the person asked, what did you do about it? I replied, and I just said, I don't even remember what I said. I think I said, no worries. I think I was just like, no worries, totally cool. And then I said, be the change in the community. Because I think that people also shouldn't ghost, you know, because I feel like
Mm.
we, you know, just wanted him to maybe mull over that fact that, like, you know, I'm not expecting anything from his response, you know, but at the same time, I think we can all be a little easier on each other. You know, we are all dealing with a lot of the same experiences and a lot of healing needs to happen together. I think the more we can lean on each other and like just talk to each other and communicate with each other would be better. Um, I think some of these conveniences on these apps are a little bit of a problem in that we're just like we're swiping through a menu, right? I think
Mm.
we need to communicate with each other and say like I can't I'm unavailable to whatever it was, honestly. I don't even care what the sentence was, you know?
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said. And to complement what you've said, I think that people don't actually have the language. We all think we're great communicators. What we really are is we're social, but we're terrified to express how we feel. So, for example, I know for me, I've rejected guys even to their face on date one because and this is the thing, like where I'm at right now is not where most people are at too. And I respect that. And that's why I help my clients with this too. You know, when we're dating, we have a tendency to personalize things like ghosting. We think, oh, well, there's something wrong with me. You know, there's something inherently wrong with me. Or we think, all guys ghost or all guys do this.
Mm.
And both of those thoughts keep us stuck. The thought that you just expressed, which is, oh, this guy's probably having a bad day, or this guy is probably unsure as to what he wants, is a
No
healthier
idea.
thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is that I know for the experience that I just had recently where I had a guy who ghosted me, I remember the setup for that. I said to him at this time, I am only looking for friends with benefits. And I made that very clear to him before we even met up. We meet up and he's asking me questions about what am I looking for in a partner. And I'm like, mate, you know, read the words that I have given you via text and what I'm saying. I am not looking for a long-term relationship. I am looking for friends with benefits. And he indicated to me that he wanted to take this further into a second date. And my brain was thinking, okay, clearly someone's just not in alignment with me. And then I never heard from him again. So and the thing is that I don't have any grudges or I'm not angry for him. I just think that, you know, it is what it is and it just seems like it was an incompatible fit. However, you know, he was a good looking guy. I could have thought to myself, oh, you know, what did I do wrong? Or, you know, this guy, he's so confused, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is that, you know, at the end of the day, when I date, I'm like, okay, it's a numbers game. I just need to keep meeting people and seeing how I feel. And quite frankly, how did I feel with that guy? Confused. I don't want to feel confused when I'm dating people. So if I'm feeling that way at date one and they ghost me, I'm like, oh, the universe has done me a favor. Like, you know, like it is what it is. That being said, I actually, to honor myself, what I then did was I went back to him a week later and said in a text message, hey, thank you very much for the date that we shared together. Listen, I just need to let you know that I haven't heard from you in a week. And I just want to say that it made me feel like I've been ghosted. I'm actually going to step back from this because the guy that I want to be with would talk with me, you know, would communicate with me consistently. And just that little act actually felt empowering to me because I was like, good, I've honored myself.
Yeah. And in that scenario, I think this is very just like coach mindset, but I would be very curious, like what the thoughts were that were running through his mind that he would, you know, want to make something out of the situation, even though you had been clear about what you're looking for and what your guidelines are. You know, I'd be really curious kind of what narratives he's operating off of. You know what I mean?
I completely agree. I feel like he's the one who needs to come to our coaching just to, like, you know, to unpack his thoughts and feelings. Yeah. And I think the answer is I've learned to just stop caring what people think, in the sense that I'm like, you know what, at the end of the day, this is something actually I've learned through mindfulness too. We do this all the time. You know, how often have we caught ourselves asking the question, you know, what were they thinking? You know, why would they do this? And the answer is, who cares? You know, if how they make you feel is bad, that's indication enough not to go back for more abuse. And I think, and this is the reason why I think a lot of people are stuck in abusive relationships, is because they're constantly trying to rationalize the irrational. And what we really should be focusing on is, okay, this person makes me feel terrible. What am I going to do about this?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I agree with you. I think that it comes down to kind of what, you know, going back to mindfulness, it comes down to like what thoughts are going through your mind as pertains to this person, you know, and the situation. Something that I loved that was asked, if you don't mind if I pick one, it was
Yeah, go for it.
they asked, so how do we communicate, you know, better and establish our boundaries in the community? I don't remember what the exact question was, but I love that, because I think what you and I just explained in our stories as examples of, you know, I'm not really identifying with this person's dismissal of me on this app, right? I'm not sitting home. I really wasn't upset about it ever. If I was honest with my feelings, I had a moment of disappointment, you know, but I wasn't identifying with the disappointment. I was just like, oh, this is based on whatever's going on with his world, he decided to ghost. And then that resulted in a feeling within me, but there's no commitment to a thought there. And so I think once you're in that freedom, you're able to just kindly say, you know, what you did made me feel disappointed. And then, you know, this is a thought I have about it. I think we could just honestly express our thoughts like you did to that guy. And then, I think a key aspect of honestly expressing your thoughts is not expecting anything in return, because then that's when it becomes manipulative. I think we have to be really careful to just, state our truth, and then and not have any expectations, essentially. It's more just because you're doing that for yourself, because you're honoring what's going on inside of you, essentially.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think in terms of how do we as a gay community, or any community really, whether you're straight, gay, bisexual, transsexual, asexual, queer questioning, I think ultimately what it boils down to is how can we reconnect our mind with our central nervous system? So how we feel. I think that we live in an age where we over rationalize what's going on in our world, that we stop thinking about how we're feeling in relation to things around us, and then figuring out what are the next steps that I need to take. So I think that part of that process is growing our awareness
Mm-hmm.
of how we feel about the world that we're living in. I think too often we focus too much on the opinions of others, the media, taking in so much information all the time. We're bombarded by thoughts and feelings from other people that we don't stop to think, well, how am I feeling in relation to all of this too? And I think it's particularly true. The thing that I love about dating is that I feel it's the ultimate mirror.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically put in front of you, and you're like, okay, what you're getting out of your life is exactly what dating is teaching you. And because your actions are a reflection of your thoughts, it'll teach you more about how you view your world and the way you think. And you may genuinely think, understandably, oh, look, I know what I'm doing. I know how to handle dating. The reality is that it's a skill set like any other.
Mm-hmm.
Communication is a skill set like any other. It's just like learning how to ride a bike. But the problem is, most of us are riding bikes at, say, a junior level, not actually at the mountain climbing level of communication that we require from between partners. And that's why I think in order to improve our community, basic steps, I think growing self-awareness, becoming more comfortable with the uncomfortable communication of actually learning to upset people,
Mm-hmm.
and being okay with just the fact that some people are going to be upset when we say things that are our truth, and not taking responsibility for that too. And I'm not talking in a selfish way. Like, I'm not saying you upset people to hurt them. I'm saying, like, when you assert boundaries and say, I don't feel good with when you do this. If a person comes back to you and says, oh, well, you do this, and they blame you, that's on them. That's
Mm-hmm.
not on you. So I think it's a skill set like any other.
Absolutely, and it takes hard work. Um, I think that's the other thing about mindfulness, is that it's not just something. No one's gonna like watch this and then be like, "Oh, okay, I won't fall victim to being ghosted anymore." It's something that you have to like work hard at to reverse those narratives in your mind. I often compare it to physical therapy. Like, um,
Mm.
there's weak muscles in your mind, and just like based on all these narratives we've talked about, right? Growing up, there's really strong limiting beliefs in your mind, and those are the strong muscles. And in order to like overcome those, you need to work the maybe weaker muscles that tell you that you are enough. You need to um
Mm.
kind of like, if you go to physical therapy, if you have a weak muscle, they're going to work the weak muscle to make it as strong as the strong muscle, so that you're a little more balanced and you can function more accurately. Which is why I do think that word acceptance that you said allows us to be the communicative people we want to be. I kind of love that. What was it, Emma Watson, that self-partnered thing she talked about?
Mm.
I think even when we find a relationship, we are still partnered to ourselves, because our experience of the world is the only one we have constant knowledge of, and it's the only one we can communicate about, because otherwise we're just entering other people's thought patterns. And this whole conversation has been about how complicated thought patterns can be, and like, if we're having trouble with our own, who do we think we are to try and control someone else's?
Oh, exactly. And I think that's where our ultimate power comes from, because when we stop realizing that we don't have to worry about changing others, we just focus on ourselves, and we're like, ultimate power to us,
Yeah.
because it's literally just for ourselves. And I think what Emma Watson is saying about being self-partnered is true. This is the final thing that I'll say out of respect for time, and also on this point of dating, is that you attract what you put out. And if you are in a position where you don't feel good about yourself, you have low self worth, you have low self esteem, guess what? you're going to enjoy the company of more of the same because it's familiar and we like what's familiar.
Mm-hmm.
So when you want to achieve a healthy, sustainable relationship, if you're treating yourself like a king or a queen, you feel good, you treat yourself well, you actually say the right words to yourself. And that's something that most people don't do. Pay attention to the words you say about yourself and also of others, because that will tell you so much about the way you think and operate.
Yeah.
And once you've achieved that, you start growing and you're on that path of being more mindful of how you treat yourself, you will welcome the people who are actually part of your tribe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just a quick funny anecdote. I recently went to the doctor like a couple months ago, and they were like, they did the questions. They're like, are you partnered? And I was like, I'm self partnered. And I don't think he had seen the Emma Watson essay, so I don't think he knew what I was talking about. But I was like, I'm happy with my answer.
I dare say he's probably happy with it too, because if you knew, because I tell you what, I think more self-partnered people are generally happier than people in relationships where they don't appreciate one another. So it's a very healthy place to be. But I want to make this clear to the audience. I'm not saying to anyone that you shouldn't be partnered. It's actually been proven by plenty of research out there that being with the right person who is a healthy fit for you can actually improve your life, extend your lifespan, promote better health. On the flip side, if you're with someone who, doesn't make you feel good, even though you're trying to push for a relationship and you're trying to make it work, can really hurt you in the long run with health and also added stress related to heart disease and a whole bunch of other things. The Gottman Institute's done plenty of research on that too. But anyways, to wrap up, Brian, I just want to say thank you so much for hopping on here today. I've got to say, I love chatting with you. That was so much fun talking about mindfulness. Where can people find you?
The Gay Life Coach. I think that's what we're connected to, and they can just follow me. We mentioned a couple books. I recently launched a brand new self-help book club exclusively for gay men. It revolves exclusively around the self-help genre, and it's just a place to all the top self-help books. I think that a lot of these things that are out there aren't necessarily written from a queer lens. So this is a chance to get together with some guys who might have had a similar experience to you in life and talk about it all. And it's led by a coach. So if people are interested in that, they can just DM me.
Amazing. Brian, thank you very, very much. The last question I'd say is, if there was one book that people could start reading to help them improve their mindfulness and being self-partnered, what would be that one book that you'd recommend them to read?
Oh, that's such a tough question, because I don't know what's going on inside people's minds, so I don't know what book would speak to them the most. But I think if you're a queer man, The Velvet Rage is an awesome place to start. I don't think that book by any means is the be all and the end all to understanding yourself, but I think it offers some great perspective. And if you're not a gay man, I'm like looking at my bookshelf. The Four Agreements is a good starter, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I think if I had to pick one to complement The Velvet Rage, I would say A New Earth is really good, because I think that it's very spiritual. And if you read it, it will give you a really good understanding of how we choose to keep ourselves stuck in our lives based on how we react with other people. So that's the last thing I'll say. Brian, I'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today on this chat. It was so much fun, and I'll be back for another live very soon. And I hope that you all enjoy your holiday period. And Brian, thank you again for joining me.
Yeah, so much fun. Thanks, everyone.
See you guys. Bye-bye.